All right, I think we're good. Why don't we go ahead and get started?
For sure. So first of all, thank you for being here. For a little bit of context to some of our guests, I started this book club on Reddit's R Product Management a little over a month ago now, and it grew quicker than I ever could have expected. In the first month, 150 people joined our Slack group. We voted on Dan Olsen's book, The Lean Product Playbook, to be the first book of our community to read. And somehow Dan caught wind of it, joined the Slack group, was getting really engaged with the community. He was stopping by on some of the virtual discussions. He was answering people's questions in Slack, and we're lucky enough to have him here for this virtual fireside chat to answer any more questions that our community has. He has a really cool background, leading product from Intuit, Friendster, and just founding his own consulting company as well. And we'd love to learn a little bit more about that, but I'll leave it to you to give a introduction about yourself and maybe how you got into product management as well.
Yeah, it sounds good. It's funny because Wyatt, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining, organizing the book club. I'm surprised actually to think about it. Someone else hasn't organized a PM book club. So thanks for being entrepreneurial, innovative, and doing that. And it's been really fun interacting with everybody in the community. And for those of you that haven't joined the Slack channel, I would recommend joining it. I think that's where most of the discussion, the high fidelity discussion is going to happen, and it's been happening. So yeah, my path, everybody has a slightly different path into product management. My story, probably not to go too far back, begins when my parents got me a computer. I'm so glad they got me a computer because I just grew up, being very comfortable with the computer and coding and things like that. I was an electrical engineering major, so I had a technical degree focused on computer systems. And then my first job actually was designing nuclear submarines for the Navy. And in that kind of an engineering design job, you actually have to think a lot about what are the requirements? What are we trying to accomplish? How fast does the submarine need to go? What are the operating parameters of it? So even though my title was technically, lead engineer, I was an engineer. I was doing, mechanical engineering and things like that. When I later got into software product management, I realized, wow, it was really kind of product management, just very technical product management. So I earned a degree in industrial engineering at night while I was working there. And then after doing the submarine design for a while, I realized, hey, I want to get more on the business side of things. I want to go get an MBA and transition into hopefully, the business world, and kind of thinking maybe technology, but not quite sure how yet. So I was fortunate to get into Stanford Business School. That's what brought me out here to Silicon Valley, where I live. And I've been out here ever since. I love it out here. And it was in business school when I learned about this kind of, growing career called product management. It was a while ago. So that it wasn't, several places had product managers, but it wasn't like anywhere near as popular as it was today. And once I learned about it, I was like, that's great, because I'm kind of got a technical background. I'm comfortable with technology, but I don't want to build the technology. I want to kind of work on the business side, work with customers to help define what the product should be. And product management sounded like a great fit. And but I had never done it. So I wanted to learn because I had never done it. And I asked people at the time, where's the best place to learn? Everybody said Intuit. So I was fortunate to get a job at Intuit, and at Intuit just basically walked into product management machine. They've been around for a while, a lot of sharp people. I learned a lot from everybody around there. So that started my path in product management. From there, after Intuit, I kind of worked my way up the ranks to become a product leader. After Intuit, I was a product leader at several startups. As you said, I started my own startup. I was CEO and co-founder of my own startup for a little while, so I know what that's like. So it's always fun to work with early stage founders and teams because I've been there. And then basically I've been consulting now for quite a while, helping companies out. So that's kind of my path to product management, and I just love it as a career. I love talking with product managers and helping them improve their craft. So it's a real pleasure to be here to talk with everybody today.
And when we're excited to have you here as well. I think that's so cool that you started your whole career in product management, building nuclear submarines before you even realized that's what you were doing, and you loved it. And so you've been in Silicon Valley since. You mentioned starting at Intuit, and as a product manager nowadays, I'm lucky enough to have the Lean Product Playbook to actually read to figure out how to do my job. So I'm curious, when you started, what type of training did you have at Intuit, and what was it like?
Yeah. So, the funny thing, it wasn't any formal training. And I think that's the interesting thing about product management is it's, there's different types of learning. I think most PMs learn experientially. They basically, it's on the job training, we used to call it OJT, or experiential learning. There are more resources nowadays. There are more books available and blogs and podcasts and things like that. But really, it was just walking into kind of a machine. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Intuit has QuickBooks, small business accounting, TurboTax, tax prep. They also have professional, all the tax tools that the CPAs use, they own as well. And they used to have Quicken, which was personal finance. That was their initial flagship product. And not a big company, but managed to like maintain very successful market share, 80% share. So, and they've been around since the DOS days, so the company had already been around for quite a while before I got there, and it iterated their processes. I won't say perfected them, but they got them pretty far along. So you would walk into this machine for Quicken, for example, it was an annual release cycle. Most of the software products are on an annual release cycle. And so they had this well-worn path of, okay, and this month we start doing customer research, and then the next month we start finalizing our market requirements document, and the next, then we have a kickoff with the dev team, and then we form feature teams, and each team kind of comes up with their roadmap and backlog, and then we start designing, and then we start coding, and then we do user testing, and then we get ready for launch. So it's like, it was just basically like a well-oiled machine that you walked into. And so on the one hand, you could completely be a sponge and absorb and learn from the machine and learn from the people that have been there for a while. And then on the flip side, you could also add your own imprint, kind of innovate on the margin and come up with new ideas as you figured things out. So that was a lot of fun. So I went through one product cycle as a PM, working on investing features, innovating that, and just getting to do lots of research. And then got promoted to be like the senior PM for the next cycle. So now I had to kind of define what research do we want to do. So that's the cool thing, is like 1 year in that well-oiled machine, and suddenly you had a lot more experience than somebody who didn't even have a year there. So like, my team, usually the management structure could be people that were just 1 or 2 years experience difference at Intuit. A lot of smart MBAs, just a lot of smart people, great culture. My general manager there was amazing. So I learned so much from him about marketing and product management. So that was basically, and then we actually, some other stuff we did. He was great. Once a month or so, he would bring in external speakers on different topics, and that was a lot of fun. But honestly, I learned the most from the team. And one of the things, for example, we had a PhD in market research on our small Quicken marketing team, right? So I learned tons from her on how to do qualitative research, how to do quantitative research. It's awesome to see in the last few years, the desire and appetite for doing user testing, right, and surveys has grown tremendously as people realize, hey, if we want to make sure our products are achieving product market fit, we need to actually go and talk to users. But there isn't necessarily a lot of training in that. So it's kind of fortunate to learn that firsthand there. So it was great. A lot of general management training as well. They had like a fast track leadership program that I took where I learned about Myers-Briggs for the first time, which is a tool that I really like to use more on the soft skills side. It's been helpful. So yeah, just a lot of learning and training from the people that were there. So it was a great experience. And, there's a book like all I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten or something like that. It's like most of the things I needed to learn about product management, I learned it Intuit basically. So not everything, but certainly an awesome, solid foundation for the beginning of my PM career.
Oh, that's awesome. I feel like a lot of new PMs nowadays are joining organizations that don't have a strong machine in terms of product development. So it's cool that you're able to get in there early on in your career and build cool things. What were some of the early projects that you had when you joined Intuit?
Yeah, well, at Intuit, so the cool thing, like for the version of Quicken, the first one I worked on, there were 3 of us, 3 PMs for the whole version of Quicken. 100 million units of sold, huge million customer base. And basically we divided the product nominally into thirds. And I was very passionate about investing. And so I had a lot of domain knowledge about how to do like portfolio tracking and tracking the performance of your investment. So I actually got to innovate and add some features there. So like asset allocation, like how to assess your asset allocation portfolio and things like that. So that was a lot of fun to be able to innovate truly. And then later we actually launched an online brokerage where again, there are already some brokerages. So back to value prop, we had to figure out how is ours going to be better or different at the time. And what we came up with was tax smart investing. So that basically before you sold a position, like say you bought 100 shares of Amazon and you were going to sell it. Well, the way it works today, most places you sell it and then you don't realize till next January you get the 1099 from your broker and it's like, ooh, you just incurred a $10,000 tax bill on your Schedule D for that. The reality is they have all the information right there. So we actually, me and the chief architect we have a patent actually on the screen that kind of shows you like look before you leave, like right before you're ready to sell it, it shows you what you want. So that was pretty cool to innovate on that. Just doing a lot of market research around the country. That was great. And then when I started consulting, then I got to work with a lot of great companies. I've been fortunate to work with many unicorns. And then there's actually 3 unicorns, a company that's worth over $1 billion, that I worked with early on before they IPO'd and became unicorns. One of those was Box. So in 2007, I did some work with Box right after their Series A. I actually ran their first user test they had ever done. So for those of you who don't know Box, great founding team, 4 friends from high school. They dropped out of college to do this together. And that's when I kind of was joining them in Palo Alto, and I ran their first user test. It was very eye-opening for them. So that was a lot. We had a lot of great learnings from there. Another one is One Medical Group, which is also IPO. So in the early days, they had a very small dev team and a very small product team. So I worked with them to innovate. They actually have an internal backend system that they use to innovate on that. And then another one of my favorite consulting engagements was Medallia. So Medallia also IPO. They're in the customer experience management space. The cool thing I got to do there was actually build their product management team. Like they had 6 product managers when I was there, and they wanted to grow to 21. And so I just kind of like took over product management, recruiting, and I would do the first interview and just kind of help grow that team. We hired a lot of talented PMs there. So anyway, there's some projects that stand out that were a lot of fun.
No, that's interesting. It sounds like you've been able to touch a lot of interesting companies and really just 10x the value there and be a real force for change and good when it comes to building products with each of these companies. In your book, you talked about prioritizing with customer satisfaction versus importance.
Right.
I'm curious on your journey, where you kind of discovered this framework and how you started applying it.
Yeah, no, the importance for satisfaction framework is I love using that framework. It's a good way to think about things. And I actually came up with it at Intuit. So when I was, responsible, the head product manager for Quicken, we have a new version every year. And the funny thing is when you have like 80+% market share, you're actually more than competing against the other product that's got 20% market share. You're competing against previous versions of your own product. So it was all about upgrading, trying to get people to upgrade. So the question was, okay, we've got all this functionality. What features do we need to improve or make better or add in order to compel people to upgrade from the older version that they have, basically? And more broadly, just how are we doing how are our current features doing? How are we doing our product market fit with our product? And so, as I mentioned, we had a PhD in market research, and the founder of Intuit, Scott Cook, came from Procter and Gamble, so they're really good at market research. And I had this like tons of data from our market research, and I was just like slicing and dicing it and going through. I remember like 2 1-inch binders of crosstabs. If you guys know what crosstab reports are, where they kind of slice the answers by different things. And I was just kind of like running different analyses. Let me compare this to this. Let me compare this to this. Let me compare this to this. And when in Excel, I remember I was like, oh, importance versus satisfaction. This looks really interesting. And it just made a lot of sense, and it resonated, and it helped me identify, okay, these features are doing great. It's really high importance, really high satisfaction. Great. Let's not mess with those. Let's not spend resources on those. But this other feature, there's one feature in particular that was relatively high importance and low satisfaction. So we use that framework to say, okay, people are telling us it's important and they're not happy with how that feature is working today. Let's go improve it. And so I start out in that context. And then as I talk about in the book, you can use that same context when you're trying to find new market opportunities. So it's slightly different context of assessing where you're at with product market fit in your current product versus new opportunities. But it's a very powerful framework. And then the cool thing was, after I left Intuit, so I developed it into it. And then several years later, I happened to come across a book called What Customers Want by Tony Ulwick. And I'm reading it, and it just blew my mind because he himself had developed his own importance and satisfaction framework independently. So I'm like, okay, if some other smart, innovating product person independently came up with this, there's got to be something there. You know what I mean? And the only difference, the framework is all the same. The only difference is how we calculate our opportunity score. Like there's no one right way to do it. There's pros and cons of different approaches, and it won't really give you a different answer, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, you want high importance, low satisfaction. That's the opportunity. So that was really cool to see that somebody else had independently kind of reach similar conclusions. So yeah, so it's a very powerful tool, again, to make sure that the needs you're solving for are actually going to, create customer value, that they're underserved needs.
No, that makes sense. I think it's fascinating that, two bright people kind of looked at building products the same way, and you both wrote books about it, and you're sizing up different opportunity scores like that. And I feel like it's something that a lot of product managers don't necessarily realize early on in their career. So I'm fortunate enough to have read your book, and I'm already using that framework over at Dollar Shave Club now. So I'm curious now. You were doing a lot of very interesting projects over at Intuit and a bunch of different companies. What led you to consulting and founding Olsen Solutions, and what are you doing there nowadays?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it wasn't deliberate. So basically, what happened is after I left Intuit and I had done 2 startups, I was like, you know what? The web is obviously here to stay. It's really important. I know I know how to code. When I was a kid, I was coding on computers, and but I didn't actually know HTML and JavaScript and PHP and MySQL and all that stuff. So I was like, you know what? I've got a technical background. Let me just go bite the bullet. I'll go take like 6 months. Let me just go intense and just learn all this stuff. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, MySQL, Apache, Unix, Photoshop. That was all the stuff that I said I'm going to learn. I was like, let me just buckle down for 6 months and just learn that. And so I was doing that. And then I got an offer to be a VP of product at a startup. And I really liked the team and I liked what they were working on, but I was literally taking about 20 hours a week of classes. So I just said, hey, I'd love to work with you, but I can't be a full-time VP of product. Can we work out some kind of part-time arrangement? And so that's how I kind of stumbled into being an interim VP of product for startups. And that went really well. That startup had signed a deal with Sony and had to quickly create an innovative music product. So the first consulting project I did was kind of like in the iTunes music space. And then I was like, well, that was a lot of fun. And then I went and I was the interim VP of product for a company called You Send It. And I took them from A to B. And then after that, I was the interim VP of product for Box, right? So I found this niche where there were these startups that had a smart founding team, had gained some initial traction, had got their Series A funding, but just didn't have usually no product manager at all, no product people at all, right? And so I would be a thought partner with the CEO and the founding team, and I would drive their efforts. So that's how I got into it. And then as we mentioned briefly, I didn't expect this, but by working with so many different companies and product teams, it accelerated my product management learning. I was like, okay, we're trying these things over here, and this is working, this isn't. We're trying these things over here, you know what I mean? All kinds of things, just comparing across different companies. So being in that kind of unique situation, and there still aren't that many product management consultants today. It's a little more popular. You can kind of hire part-time people, but it's not as popular. But I was like one of the early people that found there was an opportunity to do that. And it was a lot of fun. And in the early days, I would work with one client at a time, like 4 or 5 days a week. And then I iterated to work with like 2 clients at a time, like, 3 days with one, 2 days with the other. And that was a lot of fun. It was definitely fun, especially when you work with companies like Box and Medallia, One Medical Group. It's Series A when they were small, and then you see them flourish and grow. So it's just a lot of fun.
No, that makes sense. I think it's interesting that you've been able to jump around all sorts of different startups and different industries, and you realize, okay, well, maybe this answer over here doesn't necessarily work with this company over here.
Right.
And in your book, you talk about the case study, junk mail freeze, and I feel like that brought a lot of different topics that you talked about in your playbook together, and it kind of made me say, oh, I get the lean product process now. I was wondering, through your time at Olsen Solutions or any other part of your career, if you had another case study that you'd be interested in sharing with the group.
Sure. Yeah, and just take a step back. So I was describing kind of in the early days of Olsen Solutions what I did. It was more interim VP of product. That is kind of morphed. I don't do that as much. I don't do that. What I do is I help companies with innovation projects. So CEO may say, hey, I still get pinged by early stage CEOs trying to figure out their MVP or figure out product market fit. So I love working with them. And I'll share an example of one of those projects that's also with the lean product process. The main thing I do these days is actually training. Back to training, like there's not a lot of great opportunities to get advanced training. there are a few PM 101 courses out there and things like that. But so I do a lot of private training workshops for companies. That's a lot of fun to get in there and work with teams. I do innovation consulting and product consulting. I also do coaching. So the example I would share, I won't mention the name of the company, but it was really cool because it was actually in the kind of bio kind of space, biomed space, and it was a gene drug interaction product basically. And the idea here is that it's pretty cool because I don't, I've studied a lot of engineering. I'm not so much a chemie or bio person, but kind of as a PM, you got to quickly get up to speed on stuff. But the bottom line is, physicians prescribe drugs to people, based on a certain protocol. Like, okay, well, you have this issue, you're having anxiety. We'll start out with this drug and see how it goes, right? And they see if you react well or not. If you do, great, we're done. If you don't, then they say, oh, wow, you had a negative reaction, let's switch to another drug. Well, it turns out that they're realizing that it's differences in genetics that are causing many of those differences in reactions to drugs. And the science is getting to the point where if you could do a simple genetic test, I could tell you ahead of time, ooh, that drug's not going to be good for you. We should give you this other one for that anxiety, right? Basically, right? So that's the idea. So it was a really cool. So the cool thing is this company had done all, in my mind, the hard work. They had figured out the gene test, like just with a little cheek swab, they could figure out the genetics required to make these decisions. They had all the data on the gene drug interaction stuff, right? But what they didn't have, because they didn't have PM or UX designers, was like bringing that all to a compelling user experience that people could use. So we followed the lean product process, and and again, there's a little bit of solution space thinking, starting off with solution space. So I work with the team to walk back and say, okay, what really are the benefits that this is really providing? Clearly we have some innovative thing here, but what are the real benefits? And then I went out and talked to a bunch of psychologists. It was great. I actually went to their offices. We created, just like junk mail freeze and marketreport.com, we created in-vision prototypes, right? So like I did the wireframes, I worked with the visual designer, just like in that project, to create high fidelity mock prototypes. We showed them to the physicians, they interacted with them, we got feedback, we iterated them, so it was the same kind of thing where we took a product that kind of had the solid core technology, not so much clarity on the benefits, user experience was falling short, and the feature set wasn't fully there yet, but we used that same process to improve those aspects of the product and get it to product market fit. So it was a lot of fun, but following the same steps of the lean product process.
That's impressive, because reading the book, I initially thought like, oh, this totally makes sense for a software company, but maybe e-commerce, it could be a little bit different, and you were able to make it work in the pharmaceutical space as well. Yeah. So it really comes down to the process and looking at the problem space for the solution space. It's a universal concept in a sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, you're going around solving all these interesting problems with different companies. So what inspired you to sit down and write this book for other PMs to start absorbing this information?
Yeah, well, the other thread we haven't talked about is I started speaking as well, right? And I was very fortunate that a friend of mine was teaching a class at Stanford and said, hey, we need someone to come in and talk about viral growth, and we need someone to come in and talk about product management. So I was one of having worked at Friendster, which was the original social network, was one of the first people who actually did viral loop optimization, like way back in the day. And he knew that I had done that. And that was important for this class. It was actually when Facebook came out with their app platform, Stanford, a professor at Stanford scrambled and put together a quick Facebook app class. So that's why the viral growth stuff was important, and also just product management. So that was great because that got me speaking. So I created my first set of slides. I had all these frameworks in my head, but I never put them down in slides or paper. And so that was a lot of fun. Now I go back and look at those slides. They're very, they're very crude and things like that. But that was the start of it. So I just started speaking at conferences and speaking to PMs, speaking at incubators and VC fund events. And the cool thing there is it started a feedback loop. Just like when you use prototypes, you get feedback and iterate. When I would give my talks, I'd get questions. And what about this? And what about that? What if this happens? And so I would add more and more content and slides over time, right? The other day in one of our book clubs, I pulled up one of my decks and somebody noticed that there were over 400 slides in that deck. Like I have a lot of slides that I've created over time. Anyway, I love speaking to product people. I love sharing best practices. And I developed all these frameworks. And so I knew that I wanted to write a book at some point. And so the book, I kind of put it off for a while because I knew it was going to be a lot of work. And part of why, signing a contract with the publisher is good because it gives you a deadline. You have to do it. So that was and it was really cool because having spoken for many years, I had iterated my content quite a bit. But for example, like the pyramid, the product market fit pyramid, that didn't exist until I sat down to write the book, nor did the lean product process. So really the process of sitting down to write the book helped me take it from 75% to 100% of really kind of polishing it all up and refining it, adding some of those new frameworks that really kind of solidify it. So that's it. I love it. And the book is pretty thick. It's right here. It's 335 pages total. My goal was a couple goals. One is I want it to be comprehensive. I wanted to tell you kind of soup to nuts what you need to do as a PM. And so I'm excited that I get that kind of feedback. People say this is great, and people will bookmark certain areas that they go back to. It's there's a chapter on user testing. Well, you're not always doing user testing, but when you do, you kind of go back to that tab and you can go and refresh on what things you should be doing for user testing. The other big thing, and the reason it's called the playbook, is because I want it to be actionable. I want it to be not just some high level theory and get you kind of share some factoids and stories with you and get you fired up, but actually teach you how to do it. And that's why it's a playbook. So I've been really excited. If you look at the Amazon reviews and in the book clubs, hey, this is actionable. The second I read that chapter, I'm going to go try this out. Right. So those are kind of the goals. There is obviously frameworks in theory and concepts, but then we transition to here's how you apply them. Here's some case studies of how to apply them. So it's been a really good experience. The book is out in hardcover. There's Audible. For those of you listening to Audible, if you compare that voice to mine, you might realize that's not my voice. That's not me. And some people have commented that there's so many frameworks and tables in the book that the Audible, it's hard to see those. There's obviously a companion PDF that you can look at. I've been excited that it's been translated in several languages. So it's available in Chinese, Turkish, Polish. And for anyone in India, there's actually a paperback version. It's in English, but it's a special paperback version in India. That's actually the kind of smallest, lightest version that's out there. So I've been excited to see the response that we've gotten from the book.
No, I love that. Like you mentioned, I found a lot of value from it. It was immediately actionable. I could do a lot of things and solve problems and make my everyday job just easier from reading your book. I also noticed that you're also a community builder yourself. You started a meetup out in Silicon Valley. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, basically the common thread of the speaking and the book and the meetup is just kind of spreading and sharing best practices, right? I wish there had been resources like that when I had started my PM career. So, the book is a contribution there. And then the meetup, it was great. While I was working in Medallia, I'd always wanted to kind of start creating a product community. And they had they had a nice space there in Palo Alto. So me and the VP of product kind of partnered together and we did it. So it's been 6 years now since I started it. And what we do is monthly events, without fail, every month I host a top product or UX speaker. So it's called the Lean Product Meetup for short. The full name is Lean Product and Lean UX Meetup because I think UX is really important. So we try to get UX speakers in there, not just product speakers. And if you go to meetup.com/lean-product, you can check it out. We've grown to over 8,800 members now. And that's a really great group. And so we're on meetup.com. We used to have the events in person at Intuit's headquarters, actually, which is a lot of fun for me to go back to where I started my PM career and hold the event there. So Intuit sponsors it. But with the COVID situation, we've taken it online. So, which has been a really kind of cool opportunity for people outside the immediate Bay Area to participate. So, so we've gone virtual, and we have people from all over the world join us, which is great. And actually, our next one is on May 21st. It is with Tony Ulwick, the person that I mentioned wrote that book, What Customers Want, that lo and behold, he had independently developed Importance versus Satisfaction. So he's one of my favorite thought leaders. He's one of the pioneers of Jobs to be Done. And his latest book is actually called Jobs to be Done. So if you're curious about that, again, there's a lot of overlap between Jobs to be Done and a lot of the concepts that I'm talking about. Problem space, for example, when you write a proper job statement, according to Tony, it basically makes sure that you're staying in problem space, for example. So yeah, so it's a great event, and we usually give books away, raffle things off. You can see our activity on Twitter. And it can also be a good way to network with other product people.
I love that. I think that it's really important for product managers to always constantly be learning, going out and reading books, going to meetups. I was wondering, for product managers that are early on in their career, what are some other ways that we could hone our craft per se?
Yeah, I think luckily there's more resources. It's kind of interesting. I feel like in the last 3-4 years, product management has just taken off. Like it's just red hot, right? I think it was a couple of years ago, the Wall Street Journal said it's like one of the top jobs in the country or something, right? So it's gone from being, in the old days, it would be like, they'd have the blog post debates would be like, should product management report into engineering or marketing? And they would debate the pros and cons of that, right? So luckily now we have VPs of product and chief product officers that report up to the CEO or the GM, not in all cases, but you see that much more prevalent now. So people realize it's a critical function. And the way I like to explain that is, Mark Andreessen, the creator of Netscape and famous venture capitalist now, Andreessen Horowitz, he famously said, software is eating the world. Well, I think in the last 3-4 years, people realize, yeah, software is eating the world. And if you want your software to be successful, you need good product people to help make that happen, right? So I do think, meetups are a good way to do it. My meetup, other meetups. The other thing, we actually record all of our speakers. And it's we post all those on my YouTube channel. So youtube.com/Dan Olsen. It has my videos as well as over 60 videos from Tony Ulwick and all these other great speakers. So meetups are good. Conferences, live events. There's actually, each year I publish a list of the product conferences, major product conferences. I was about to publish this year's list and then COVID happened. So I haven't published it because all of a sudden they got postponed or rescheduled. Now what's going on is many of them are switching to virtual. So for example, Industry is a great conference in Ohio. A lot of people haven't heard about it, but it's been going on for several years. They usually do it in September. They just decided to go virtual. Product School puts on a lot of conferences, and they're doing a virtual one on May 21st as well. So there are some, there used to be the real world conferences. I really miss those. It's so great when you get to rub elbows and talk with real, product people and compare notes and talk about their personal questions. So I'm excited for those to come back. In the meantime, we've got virtual conferences. Other things, there's a lot of blogs out there nowadays, books, obviously, right? My book, other books, there's more and more books. Podcasts have come back. Podcasts were hot for a while, then they kind of tailed off. Now they're back again. So there are more and more podcasts. I actually did one briefly called Product Decoded with a couple of friends of mine. We took turns interviewing different product leaders. We only did one season because it is a lot of work, but that's pretty cool to check out. And then I think, if you really want to take your product management skills to the next level, workshops are a great forum for doing that. There are public workshops, for example, like I'm doing a public workshop with the industry folks on May 21st. Those have gone online now instead of being in person. There are also private workshops, that you can do. So yeah, those are all the good thing is there's a lot of different modalities now between the books, the blogs, the videos, the podcasts, the virtual events, whether it's conferences or workshops. There's multiple ways, for people to learn and gain knowledge and improve their skills.
That's awesome. Now, I want to be mindful of time because I love hearing about your background.
Sure. Yeah.
I love just hearing about all the different things that you've worked on in the past. But I'm wondering if there's another place that participants can go just to learn more about you or some more of your content that you're working on.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to get to their questions. That'd be great. I'm going to chat some links here so people have it. Basically, my main website is my name, dan-olsen.com, Dan-OLSEN. My YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan Olsen. You can check that out. There's all free talks there. And I mentioned the workshop. I'll just chat these links on the 521 workshop. And then, finally, last but not least, my book on, if anybody, hasn't had a chance to check it out, you can see the reviews and see if it's for you. So I'll just chat those links there. So people have them. And, but the main one is dan-olsen.com. That has links to everything else there. If you want to just, and you can also have a little email newsletter you can sign up for. I think I've only mailed it a few times, so I'm definitely anti-spam. But if you want to kind of keep posted, I also on my website have a speaking tab, so you can kind of see where I'm going to be speaking. Right now they're all virtual. I was slated to speak in Singapore and Norway, and we were talking about going to Israel. So I'm excited to once we get back to normal here, heading around the world and hopefully meeting many of you in person at these events. But with that, why don't we go to some questions? Why it looks like we have a lot of good questions and some votes.
Totally. So for those that don't know, I'm actually chatting each of you individually, and I'm going to let you know that you'll be able to ask your question live. I don't want this just to be us two talking all day. We want to get you guys involved with this. So the first one has 10 upvotes. I'm going to butcher your name, Abishkesh.
Abhishek.
Reaching out to you right now, and I'm going to promote you to panelist. Just accept the invite, and then you'll be able to turn on your audio and video, and you can ask your question live with us.
There he is. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey guys. So first of all, thanks Wyatt and Dan for doing this. It's 1:45 a.m. here in Singapore, and it's totally worth it. By the way, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
So my question that I posted over there, right? So Dan, can you recommend some techniques to conduct customer research and be able to validate those needs remotely?
Yes.
Given the impact that COVID has had on everything, as a fairly beginner product manager, it really seems like a really challenging prospect to basically go out there and conduct the customer research in a remote manner. Yeah. So if you could help on that point.
You know, it's funny because even pre-COVID, a lot of times you just have to do it remote because you can't get to where the customers are, right? So one thing I would say is, you can recruit. There's two main types of research you can do. One is customer discovery research, where you don't have a prototype per se, you just want to talk to people. And so assuming you can recruit the people, then basically you can do it remotely, right? So as long as you can find them, you would do, like we're using Zoom right now, right? Zoom has been an awesome tool. You can use Zoom, Google Meet, those kind of things to conduct research. And doing user discovery like this, it's not that much too big of a difference, right, from doing it. And so actually I did that. So actually another lean product process example I just thought of, I'd forgotten about, was there was an e-commerce company I was working with, and we had to find shoppers that like fit a certain profile. They shop online, they buy like fashion clothes with a certain frequency and a certain amount. Well, I did all those interviews online, right? We basically recruited them. And there are so one thing I'll mention, there are places that if you're trying to find the users, that's one of the things that might come up. So if you have an existing user base, you can mine your existing user base and ask for people. There's also several websites, obviously usertesting.com, that have panels. Userinterviews.com is one that I like to use. If all you need is to recruit people, userinterviews.com is great, and then you just use Zoom. User testing has the whole thing built in with the panel and the testing and all that. That's for bigger companies that want to have a knowledge base. Validately is another solution. So there are solutions out there basically to find the people and then do it on Zoom. So that's customer discovery. Then the next one is, okay, well, once I have a prototype, how do I get feedback on that? Same thing. I actually, for that same research, did prototypes. So we had InVision. Those of you that are familiar with our work know I'm a big fan of prototyping and testing with prototypes before you do any coding or building. And InVision is a great tool. So same thing, what we would do is in the middle of that session, I'd say, okay, great, I'm going to chat you a link to a web prototype, and they would click on it, and then you watch them go through that. So I actually think it's very amenable to doing remotely. Ostensibly easier to set up logistically because you don't have to worry about, hey, come meet me at this place. Now, obviously, I love doing in-person interviews, what I call in-person moderated. I love that because there is a little more nuance of I can actually like hear subtle nonverbal communication. If you sigh, if you make a little noise, I can see better where your eyes are looking. But at the end of the day, remote with the tools like Zoom and InVision, I think you can get most of the data that you need to. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. It does help, but I think one point that comes up, like, what if the kind of product that you're trying to build or the kind of customer research that you're trying to do is with the kind of user that's probably not as tech savvy as you would want them to be.
Yeah.
I don't know, in an ideal world, like, because I work for this fintech startup that works with a lot of SMEs.
Mhm.
So a lot of those guys, their usage of technology is fairly basic, right? So how do you maybe tackle a situation like that?
Well, I think, normally within any kind of group like that, there's going to be a distribution of tech savviness, right? They may skew to be less tech savvy. So maybe you'll get a little self-selection of people that are more tech savvy. Maybe you have to walk them through it a little more. Maybe you do a phone call. Like if they don't know how to set it up, you say, okay, let's start out on the phone. I'm going to walk you through installing Zoom and how to do it. You know what I mean? So like even Wyatt and I, we did a dry run before this to make sure we had all the mechanics down. So I think there's ways around it. Again, I think that is if you are really solving a problem for them and you find the people that have that problem and want a solution to it badly, they're gonna make the time and effort and figure out how to cooperate with you in your research. So yeah, you may have to get more creative of maybe you write up the instructions, maybe you write a Google Doc or you send them a PDF of here's step by step how you log on to a Zoom call, right? There are ways around it. It might just require a little extra work. So thanks for the question. Let's move on to the next question if we could. That'd be great.
Sweet. Thank you again, Abhish.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next is Forrest. If you could maybe turn on your video and your mic and ask your question.
I'm having trouble turning on my video, but I'll just go ahead and ask the question anyway. Yeah. My question was, I'm in a situation now where I'm, I guess, having trouble because we don't have proper, A/B testing tools, but I'm kind of wondering how you can get clean, usable data without those tools.
What kind of data are you trying to get, Forrest?
Trying to see, I guess, how users interact with a new feature or just a different landing page mainly. So wanting to serve, a group of users a certain landing page and compare it to a control. Got it.
So A/B testing is something that's become a more popular concept. And the good news is there are a lot of third-party tools out there that you can use. For example, Optimizely, has A/B testing. So especially, and not to oversimplify, but you've got kind of simpler A/B tests like marketing, like you mentioned, landing page, right? Optimizely is great for landing page A/B testing. So a lot of times companies fall into the trap of thinking they have to build it themselves. A/B testing, and it's true, some of the big, larger tech companies have built it, but most companies, it's better to just buy versus build because they've already solved all the issues and it's pretty easy to install. So I would recommend checking out third-party tools if your company's having trouble. And then on the back end, we were talking about landing pages, where it gets more complicated is like if you've got different versions of a feature or a flow, right? It's not just a simple marketing page. And that's like more back-end A/B testing where you need server-side tools. Well, that market, the front-end market has been around for a while. The back-end market is finally getting more mature. So even Optimizely has launched a back-end server-side, thing that you can do. There are other companies like Split, that offer, kind of feature flag capability. So anyway, the good news is the market of tools has evolved quite a bit, and there's some really good tools out there. But the other thing, A/B testing, a lot of people, sometimes it's like a hammer looking for a nail. People really think I got to A/B test, I got to A/B test, I got to A/B test. And the reality is, like any tool, there's an optimal situation to use that tool, and there are other ones where it's not optimal. Now, if I was having trouble in your situation, I understand you don't have the right A/B testing data or tools. The fundamental thing I would want is just analytics, right? Just like what is the conversion rate on that landing page? Even if I don't have A/B testing, if you can isolate the data and compare the conversion rates yourself. And the simplest way to do that is a before and after. Just like, okay, let's run the old one 1 week. Let's see what the conversion rate is. Let's run the new one for a week and see what the conversion rate is, right? So that works. Or if there's a way you can segment your traffic, and I would guess if you don't have the right A/B testing tools, maybe that's not happening. We can say, hey, let's just put a little JavaScript in or backend thing that randomizes and says, let's send 50% of people this version, 50% this version. As long as you can keep those two groups of people straight and separate, you can compare the two things. So the only real advantage of A/B testing is you can do it concurrently. So if there were any exogenous factors, it wouldn't mess things up. But you'll actually notice a lot of my examples in the book are before the days of all these robust A/B testing tools. We just did a simple before and after, right? And we saw a big pop. But it sounds like I would guess the main thing you mentioned, A/B testing tools. It makes me wonder about the situation, your product analytics situation, because I suspect you don't have a robust, just basic product analytics situation. And I think product analytics is a precursor and a prerequisite for A/B testing. I wouldn't even worry about A/B testing tools until I had a solid product analytics solution in place. And again, there are great tools out there. You have Heap, you have Amplitude, you know, Mixpanel. There are several choices out there these days for those kind of analytic packages.
Cool. Thank you.
Hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for your question, Forrest. We got Matt up next. If you want to just turn your mic on, turn video on.
Who's going to be the first video QA person? Let's see.
Oh, I'm trying to. It says the host has stopped it. I'm happy to do video if you guys would like.
I think he has to. We have to enable. I think you have to enable it. You have to offer it. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Here we go. There it is. You know what? There was a setting we didn't have. Try it now, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for we QA'd the bug. We iterated. Try
Everyone
it now.
see me and hear me all right?
There we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Gray. I'm a director of product at Zipcar. I'm calling in from Boston, Mass, where Zipcar is headquartered. Anyway, so I had 2 questions and I can't see them now, so I'm going to have to just try to remember what I wrote. One of them was related to Dan, your book is obviously very thorough, covers the end-to-end product development, especially emphasizing early stage product development. Steve Blank also has written a book that has a similar scope, and then it's very early stage, and he calls customer discovery. You actually just mentioned customer discovery in an earlier question. So I guess I was just wondering if you could potentially compare and contrast like how your framework and Steve Blank's framework relate to each other. I guess
Sure.
I could start with that question. That was one.
Yeah, let's start there. Yeah, basically, I think, again, you know, I mentioned earlier, like I kind of created importance and satisfaction. Lo and behold, Tony Ulwick created it. I think you start to see more examples of thought leaders kind of reaching similar conclusions. And I think that's the case with customer development. Obviously, Steve Blank, his book came out before mine, but the principles are the same. And I think the reason he called it customer development is kind of a funny sounding term that does, you know, I don't think it's stuck a lot. Some people that are familiar with it know it. It's a great term. It's a great concept. But I think he was trying to contrast product development and customer development. Like, hey, we're all spending all this time worried about the product development and what do we build and agile and all that jazz. So I think the intent of that term, the way I see it was, no, let's talk about customer development. Just like we think about how we're developing products, let's think about our customers. So I think it's highly consistent with the initial parts of the lean product process where it's like, who do we think our customers are? Like step 1 is who is our target customer, right? Defining your target market, using segmentation techniques to do that. And I think, again, you know, he's one of the pioneers of lean startup as well, as viewing it all as a hypothesis. This is our hypothesis of who we think our customer is. Let's get out of the building, you know, which is a phrase he likes to use, and talk to people and see, you know, do customer discovery interviews and see if that's actually who they are or not. And along the way, let's also kind of get clear on what we think the problems are that we're solving for them. And see if they agree, you know. So I don't think for example, he doesn't specifically have importance versus satisfaction, but the goal of getting out there and talking to people is to test your hypotheses about, have you identified the right target market? And are you finding, you know, relevant pain points that you can address for them, right? So, so it's very similar. I think importance versus satisfaction just adds a rigorous framework so that as you talk to people, you can identify how important each need is that you might solve and how satisfied they are to better identify those opportunities. So, but I think there's more commonality. And you see that, like, as I mentioned briefly, jobs to be done. There's a lot of commonality. Sometimes people get tripped up on semantics. I actually just taught a workshop Monday and Tuesday, and a lot of it was, you know, when somebody hears a certain word, they infer all this meaning to it, right? So if I say customer need versus customer want versus customer pain point versus a job to be done, right? Versus a customer benefit. Like at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. You know, some people get really tripped up on semantics. It's like, it's just, you know, how are you going to create value for the customer, right? Basically. So
yeah, actually on the topic of semantics, that was related to my second question, or I'll jump off after that, is the term MVP can be somewhat triggering for people. You mention it in your book a bunch. I know you also kind of provide context around it, but there's been numerous blog posts, including from thought leaders at Intuit, that have talked about, you know, minimum lovable product. In fact, I even took an extension after reading parts of your book and Steve Blank's book, and we were working on such low fidelity mocks early on and actually getting customer commitment to buy them at this company, Tetra Science, where I was the head of product. that we called it the earliest sellable concept. Like, what could we sell that
Sure.
could have just been a paper drawing, and or a PowerPoint, and then that the next thing after that was like the earliest lovable product or something, we called it that, and then beyond. Anyway, so the point was like MVP is triggering, and how do you contextualize this? How has MVP been used and abused over time?
Oh, it's been used and abused a lot. So, anytime you have, movements and frameworks and things, like Lean Startup, Lean Product Playbook, so you have buzzwords like MVP, right? And then what happens is they can get wildly interpreted, right? And in fact, my workshop went over by 45 minutes because of the MVP discussion. We got to that point and it's like, we just had a great discussion. It was great. It was worth it. I trimmed some other stuff to make time. But it is such a polarizing, it can be polarizing. What I love, I laugh. I remember years ago, I saw a blog post where someone was excited that they had used a landing page as an MVP to learn things. And they wrote a blog post about it, and said, how I used a landing page MVP to learn about stuff. Fine. Somebody read that post and was like, just very upset and said, a landing page is not an MVP. So they wrote their own post about a landing page is not an MVP. And so that's the one dimension you see, the one area of difference of opinion. And I always do this in my workshops. I'm like, who here thinks, let's just settle this, landing page is an MVP or not? Do you think it is or not? And then some people will say it is, some people say it won't. And, basically the people that don't think a landing page is an MVP, their point of view is like, well, don't you know what the P means? It means product, minimum viable product. A landing page is not a product. That's not a product. You can't use it. So it's not a product. So it's kind of like this hardcore kind of conservative view of product of MVP is like, it's got to be a product. And then the people on the landing page side, well, my interpretation is anything that you can learn, you can test your hypotheses with and learn from, that's an MVP. So it's a more liberal, loose interpretation. And you're never, in my experience, you're never going to get those two parties to see eye to eye because they're so entrenched in their point of view. And that's why in the book, I recommend getting out of that trap by just going up one level and calling them all MVP experiments or tests. And then the loose liberal people, of course, still agree that it's an MVP. And then I look at the hardcore product people and I go, well, can we agree that a landing page is an MVP test if we reserve MVP for the true product MVPs? Is that okay? And they kind of usually begrudgingly say, okay, I'll go along with that. So that's the crux of it. And over time, this isn't in the book, working especially with B2B companies, there's a spectrum of MVPs. And I think at the extreme, and you mentioned this too, and there's various interpretations when people start inventing alternative acronyms, like minimum level product. One time I was about to go on stage to speak at a company, and right before I went on stage, like, hey, just so you know, our execs don't believe in MVP. They believe in minimum level product. I'm like, okay, so you've got minimum level product, minimum sellable product, minimal viable feature, minimal sellable feature. You got all these different things. Your company was inventing their own early stage, or acronyms. So it's bad when everyone's doing that, right? But at the end of the day, there's a variety, and that's why I created the matrix in the book. There's like a matrix that categorizes all the different things you can do, Wizard of Oz, prototypes, things like that. And so, but the main point of it is just like, what's the simplest thing that we can create to test our hypotheses, right? And so on that spectrum, the most extreme one is sell it. Can I sell it? Can we sell this thing or not? And what's funny is most companies will assume it needs to be a working product to sell it. But as you just said, you guys were you're pre-selling prototypes, you're pre-selling wireframes. That's great. And people just can't imagine that's even a possibility.
Yeah,
so
it blew my mind when I did it, actually. I was shocked at the fact that we had closed deals, signed deals, where they weren't expecting delivery for like 3 months, but that gave us a time. You talked about deadlines and your publisher asking for the things. Holy crap, when you have a customer who's already paid and they're waiting for a product that doesn't exist, that's a deadline.
Yeah, and people just don't even think that that's possible. Like, no way, no one would buy vaporware. What are you talking about? But if you are solving a high importance, low satisfaction problem for the right customer base that really feels that pain point, they will. They'll be like, oh my gosh, this company has lightning in a bottle to solve this. I know it's early stages, but it sounds like they really get this, and I want to do that. So sellable is the extreme. The next one is, hey, is it something that they can actually use? And there's use like a full product, and there's use kind of like interact with like a prototype, I guess, would be the next level in. And then the lowest one would just be, hey, something they can see or check out, right? And so a landing page would be something they could see. So there's a whole spectrum there. And I think the problem is too many people skew towards the heavy end of that spectrum. Oh man, it's got to be an actual functioning product. oh, it's got to be something ready for sale. Otherwise, we can't even do it. Well, that's a very expensive way to do it, right? It'd be much better to dip your toe in the water with a prototype as you did and get feedback before you go and build stuff. So thanks, Matt, for those
Thank
great
you
questions.
very much. That was very thorough. Appreciate it.
Who's next?
It's like we got Ben next.
Okay.
I've enabled my video. I don't see it.
Is that something on our side, or
is your camera switched over? Physical?
I'm not sure. Anyway, we can continue without video. Okay. So my question was, it's not a personal question for me. I'm fortunate enough to be working at a startup now, but I see a lot related to this, whether it's on Reddit or in kind of videos, even on Dan's own channel. The question's around what can you do as a product manager improving product development, your product strategy at an organization where you aren't necessarily empowered.
Ben.
And then I took a dig at safe at the end of the question.
Okay, got it. Cool. All right. So good to see you again, Ben.
Good to see you as well.
All right. So I'm going to share this. I didn't have this ready. Let me just do this real quick. I'm going to, since we talked about PM empowerment, I got to share something that's not in the book. So Wyatt and Ben already know this, but let me just pull it up real quick since we'll have a little fun here, hopefully. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen in a sec when I get it ready, and then we'll talk about this. Yes, that's one of the challenging things about being a PM. There we go. Cool. Okay, let me share my screen. Let me get in here. All right. Where is Zoom? Hold on, Zoom. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Share my screen. Share screen. Okay. And then PowerPoint, and then boom. All right. So this is not in the book. It's gonna go.
So you see your kids right now.
Yeah, I know. That's how it has to be. There we go. Cool. So this is from not in the book. And if you're wondering why didn't I put this in the book, it's because it's such a closely guarded product management secret that I didn't want just anybody in the world out there finding out about it. And so that secret is the product manager's motto. And some of you may have heard it from my talks. If you did, then you already know it. But if you didn't, it's a bit like Spider-Man's motto. So I'm sure we have some Marvel fans in the audience here. Spider-Man's motto from his uncle is basically, with great power comes great responsibility. Now, the product manager's motto is similar. It's just a little different. And it's, with great responsibility comes no power. And it's funny on the outside, but it's a little sad. We're crying on the inside when we have that. So when I hear the word, hey, what if we're not necessarily empowered, from Ben's question, that's what I think about. So anyway, yeah. So what step strategies can be taken to improve product strategy in organizations where PMs are not necessarily empowered? So it's tough, because I'll start out with the harshest recommendation, which is, if you are so unempowered, you might want to consider going to a different organization. Like, that's just, a lot of times over my career at my talks, I had someone come up to me and it just becomes asking me for advice, and it becomes very clear that they're in a situation where it's just like PM's at the bottom of the food chain. It's engineering driven org, or sales driven org, and they just don't have, the kind of the influence they need in order to do it. So I don't want to start out. We'll start out with the doom and gloom scenario, maybe think somewhere else. Assuming it's just typical disempowerment, which is just, hey, we've got to kind of, fight for stuff here, and the question is on product strategy. In my experience, a lot of it depends on the leader. Like, do you have a product leader or not? And so what happens a lot of times is you may have PMs or senior PMs, but there's no product leader who has a seat at the table, the executive table, or the voice of the executives. So if you have a leadership vacuum in the product org, that can contribute to that, right? Assuming you do have a product leader, the question is, how effective are they? That's one. Hopefully they're effective. And then finally, I think that I have seen success with organizations where you're basically building a case. So if you don't have power, right, you have to influence. This came up in the book club yesterday. You have to influence without authority. You have to influence. So how do you influence people, right? You influence people with data, right, with insights and knowledge, right, and evidence. If it's opinions, if you say, hey, I think we should build X, they're going to go with their opinion, right? So you need to kind of build that evidence up. The to say, hey, we went out and did some research. Let's show you what we learned. Here's why we need to do this. We did some competitive analysis. Here's what we learned. Here's why we need to do this for a product strategy. The other thing is a framework. Sometimes when I give my workshops, it's like, hey, why don't more companies have product strategies? Have robust product strategies. There's two main reasons. One is focusing on the short term. If companies are always focused on what's launching this sprint, what are we doing this week, what are we doing this month, and can never look beyond that, it's kind of like a car driving at night. How far ahead do your headlights, project? Can you actually see out there? So that's one reason. There may be, and everybody has a short-term bias, right? Because everybody's focused on, especially public companies, they got to hit their quarterly numbers. That's one. The second one is not having a framework, and that's where the Kano model value product strategy framework in the book provides a framework. The last thing is motivation. So, a lot of times when I get called in for consulting, sometimes it's because it's a company that has aspirations of improving what they want to do, but sometimes it's a company that's tried a couple times and failed. And so failure can be a big motivator, and failure is kind of one way to think of it. The other way is, if people don't want to call it a failure, is, well, we set these ambitious objectives for this new product initiative, and we did the work, we launched it, and it didn't achieve it. So in an organization that actually wants to get better, that can acknowledge that honestly and say, wow, we've tried this a couple times, we didn't do a good job, that can be fertile ground for a change in thinking and empowering product management people, right? Especially if they come to the conclusion, like, for example, sometimes startup founders that don't have a product background will have that happen. They try a couple product initiatives, they don't go well. They talk to their advisors and VCs, and their advisors and VCs start to ask questions about, hey, well, who do you have on the product management front? What do you have on the design front? And they may realize that they're understaffed and under-resourced in those areas. So I come across those companies that are going through those transitions quite a bit. So anyway, those are some thoughts on, hopefully. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a voice at the right management level in order to influence product strategy. I think that's probably the key thing I would say.
That answers it. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Ben. Okay, Emily. Oops.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Wyatt. Thanks for doing this. I'm still an undergrad, and I've heard from a lot of people that PM isn't necessarily what they thought it was. Usually a positive experience, but sometimes negative. So I was just wondering what you think are some of the most common misconceptions about PM as a career.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that there are people that graduate college and become PMs and they get surprised by something about the job? Is that what you're saying?
Not just new grads, but sometimes just users on the subreddit. So don't know what they're saying.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I guess it depends kind of what formed your expectations in the first place. So I'll tell you, some things, it's funny. I think one of the biggest surprises is what we just joked about, like that you have no authority. Right? That even though management is looking at you and going, hey, how did our revenue numbers look last week? What do our retention numbers look like? And they're holding you on the hook for that you don't have the commensurate authority of the resources required to influence those things directly anyway. You can't just tell engineers what to build. You can't just tell marketing people what to do. So I think that's one thing, because even in the title product manager, if you took it literally, like, well, I'm a manager. I'm a product manager. I'm a manager. People are going to listen to me, So, that's one, is the need to kind of, and it can be pretty extreme. I'll share a funny example. I was talking at a conference and there was a person who had recently switched from product marketing to product management. And they said, well, Dan, hey, I really liked your talk. Can I just have a question for you? I'm like, sure. She's like, well, how much time should I be spending persuading the developers that what I'm advocating for, that they should really be spending time and working on what I'm advocating for? I was like, well, I don't know, how many hours are you spending now? She's like, probably about 4 or 5 hours. I'm like, well, 4 or 5 hours a week, kind of going around and discussing, your product ideas with people and persuading them. That doesn't sound unreasonable. And she's like, no, Dan, it's 4 or 5 hours a day. So that's just kind of, you can get in those kind of situations. If you're in that kind of a strong disempowered situation, that's not fun to be in, right? So anyway, and it's tough because if you're a new PM, you don't have a lot of credibility yet, right? So you got to kind of earn, it's this tough thing of like, you got to earn your cred, and so you got to earn your cred so that you get more cred. And anyway, it's tough. So that's one thing. Let's see, what else? Probably the other would be the breadth of the job. you know, like if you are an accountant or you do marketing, the breadth of your job is pretty well defined. Like I just got to, you know, I got to do these financial statements. I got to do this marketing campaign. Product management, the breadth and depth of the job depends on the situation. It's situation dependent. Like I like to say, good PMs abhor a vacuum. Like you fill the gaps. If there's no designer on the team and you need to make prototypes, who's going to make the prototypes? Probably the PM. Oh, your management thought that QA was a luxury and we don't need QA and it's time to test the product. Who's going to test the product? Probably product management, right? So depending on the situation in the org, you may be spending more time on different things. You know, maybe get pulled into sales calls, right? So that's part of it too, is one, having to be wide in your skill set. You know, it's not just like you do one activity or two activities or use 2 or 3 skills. You've got to use a lot of different skills. You're going to be doing a lot of different activities. So you got to be comfortable with that breadth. You've got to be comfortable with ambiguity. It's not like you're going to walk in and someone's going to say, here's your job. You know, your job is going to be something like, okay, you need to figure out what we need to build next. Go talk to customers and figure that out. And that's pretty unstructured, pretty unstructured to figure out the details. So you got to be comfortable with ambiguity. You also got to be comfortable kind of like being autonomous and kind of like driving the bus, but not in a bossy way, because you're not the boss of anybody, but you got to like form a vision. So it's like, you've got to kind of come up with a point of view for your cross-functional team, your Scrum team. You've got to guide them unofficially, guide them to say, oh, here's, I think, what's going to create the most value. So, and I think building on all those, like the importance of soft skills, right? I think a lot of people, especially people that are engineers that go begin a PM, like, all right, I'm going to be PM, I'm technical, I understand it. There's a lot of soft skills with all the persuading and running effective meetings and writing clear communication on whether it's JIRA tickets or PRDs or whatever it is. There's a lot of communication and soft skills that are required to succeed, in addition to all the kind of technical skills that I cover in my book: prioritization, right? Writing good user stories, road mapping, things like that. So, you know, one of the things I think a lot about these days are, what are all the different set of skills that you need to succeed as a product manager? And I recently kind of revised my list, and I'm up to 20 skills. I don't know if I'm fully done yet or not, but there's 20 different skills that that I think are important. Obviously, different, like as I mentioned, different situations, different subsets of skills will be important than others, but there's a lot of skills you need. So those are some thoughts on what people might find surprising if they get into product management.
Thanks, Anna. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. We probably have time for one more question, but they were a little shy in asking it, so I'm going to do it on their behalf. So,
okay, cool.
Harsha was wondering, in their customer discovery interactions and figuring out jobs to be done, there are a lot of unspoken latent needs that the customers don't necessarily spell out or detail it. And she's wondering what your advice is on capturing the latent needs and how important those are for forming product strategy.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, here's the thing, like, I'll start out again with the kind of extreme example. Like, sometimes I see a company or product team go and they'll like do some customer discovery interviews, or they'll show a customer prototype, and they'll almost turn it on the customer and be like, well, what do you want? Tell us what you want. And it's almost like, it's like if you show them a prototype, you're like, why don't you sketch out the prototype that you want? You know, they're not designers. Customers are not designers. Customers are not product managers. They're not just, it's not a matter of going and being an order taker, you know, at a restaurant. They don't know what they don't necessarily, they can't articulate it per se necessarily, right? Now, that's not true always. Sometimes you get power users who know exactly what they want. An example I'll give you, I love audiobooks. I listen to Audible. And it's not just Audible, like any and video or audio, when you want to listen to it, you can have a speed, a 1x speed, 1.25x speed, whatever, right? Well, 1x, I like to do it. I can do it a little faster. I want to kind of, you know, listen to it a little faster. I can't do 2x like some of my friends. That's too fast for me. And the choices that they gave are like 1.25 or 1.5. Well, 1.25 is good. 1.5 is too fast. 1.25 is a little slow. It's kind of like Goldilocks. The other day I logged in, I used my Audible app, and I'm like, it went 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. I'm like, yes, some product manager at Audible realize, why are these arbitrary increments? It's like some engineer put in 1, 1.5, 2, 4. You know, they just like kept doubling it. I'm like, no one's gonna, those don't make sense. Give me some fine tuning. I was so thrilled I took a screenshot. If I had time, I would write a blog post about it, right? That's that's kind of and that might be an example of where a power audible user would be like, you know what, it really bugs me that I can only do 1.25 or 2. Why don't you guys offer finer control? In certain situations, you will get power users that can articulate that. Most people probably won't be able, most users won't. So that's your job, is to figure out those latent needs. So one, that's your job. And it's by going out and doing customer discovery interviews, and you just have to kind of ask a lot of questions and just listen actively and try to form a mental model of what's going on, right? And you pattern match. And so if you talk to a bunch of people, and it's also observation, right? So this is the difference between what people tell you and what they do, right? Behavioral versus attitudinal, right? In an ideal world, it's called ethnographic research. You would like kind of like sit with the chimpanzees and watch them using and just watch, and then it would be all behavioral, right? We can't afford to do that. It's so creepy to be sitting behind someone's desk. Although sometimes people do that for certain workflows. Imagine you were working in a field where there was a complex workflow. It might be worth saying, hey, can I just like kind of watch you go through this workflow? And then you'll see where people are having trouble, where they're doing workarounds, things like that. They may not even remember it or be aware of it, right? I call it, this happens a lot to product teams. When you have been using your product for so long, you forget what it's like for a brand new user to use it. I call it like you're building up these calluses, so you lose your sense of touch, or product blindness. I call it product blindness, right? The number of times I'll go with a new client and I'll go through the new user flow and I'll find issues that they're completely oblivious about. It's because they already figured out the workarounds and how to get through it, and there's a curse of knowledge they can't undo, right? So same thing with users, watching them, listening to them. And so what you got to do is form hypotheses from what you observe. So this may sound kind of like a conceptual answer, but that's really what you have to do to try to hopefully glean some of those latent needs, because they won't always tell you right away. The other things you can do is say, well, what are you using today? How did you pick that? What do you like about that? What do you not like about that? In the book, I think in the customer discovery interview section, I have some of those questions. That's a way to try to get the raw material out to help you then form hypotheses to then circle back and test in the future with other people. So, but I will say this, I guess to be really clear, it's going to come from qualitative one-on-one user sessions. You do not get those kind of insights from surveys, and I won't go off too much on surveys, but far too often people use surveys to try to do what you're suggesting, and never works. It just doesn't work. Well, I'll put in other box. People can write in the other and they'll give me all the info. Again, they're not going to just give you the answers because they don't know the answers. And you really want to have that rich interaction with people when you're trying to find those latent needs.
Cool. I think that makes sense. And it looks like we're just about out of time. Dan, I want to thank you again for making the time, for stopping by and answering the community's questions. I really appreciate your breadth of knowledge, and I think a lot of people got a lot out of this. I already see a couple people are saying, thank you, Dan. So I wish we could like clap or something, but I have to do it myself right now. Is there anything else you'd like the community to know about before we log off?
No, just thanks again, everybody, for coming in here and asking your questions. And sorry we didn't get to all of them. Didn't have time to get to all of them. But and Wyatt, thanks again for organizing the book club and making this the Slack group and making this call happen. So it's always great to engage with people. Product management can be a challenging job, especially if you're new to it. So it's nice to get together with people and share some advice and answer some questions. So I appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you at some virtual or real world events soon, and we can talk in person.
Totally. I'll be stopping by your meetups. This will be fun. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. I'll be sending an email with an invite to the Slack group if you're interested in getting engaged. And yeah, till next time.
Take care. Bye.